Hello everybody and welcome back to Spooky Season, where every single video I make for the month of October will be centered around a different horror game, so make sure to subscribe for the rest of them. But today we're talking about Karma the Dark World, which released earlier this year, but the game plays very much like a walking sim, so I decided to answer the question, is Karma the Dark World even a horror game? So let's dig into the story, because this is where the idea of horror in Karma the Dark World really comes from. Don't worry, it's relatively spoiler free, I'm not discussing specific story events, not that it would mean much without context anyway. The game takes heavy inspiration from Orwell's 1984. You're dropped into a surveillance state where everything you do is observed, judged and controlled. The world is bleak, oppressive and unrelenting. You play as an investigator for an organisation that is essentially the government's arm of control. On paper, your job is to root out untruths and keep society in line, but the more you dig, the more minds you delve into, the more the cracks show. Your role isn't about protecting people, it is about reinforcing a system that strips away individuality. The horror here doesn't come from monsters jumping out at you or sudden scares, although that does happen. It's existential. The story keeps asking what happens when your very sense of self isn't yours anymore. You're forced to sift through memories, through documents, and images that blur the lines between what's real and what's fabricated. There's this constant tension between who you are and who the system forces you to be, and that psychological suffocation is at the heart of the experience. The imagery really drives this home, rooms twist in impossible ways, pretty much everybody's face just looks wrong, and you never feel grounded, and it is intentional. The game wants you to feel disoriented, alienated, and small in a world that is designed to crush individuality. And there is, of course, Mother. She's one of the game's most memorable figures, who acts as a sort of authority figure, but one that feels a lot more mythological than human. Interacting with her pulls the story deeper into psychological territory. She isn't just a character you are afraid of being caught by, it's what she represents. She represents the suffocating power of the system, this idea of control turned into something monstrous. Her very design is uncanny, straddling the line between familiar and grotesque, which does keep you a little bit on edge. And this is why, in terms of narrative, I would say that Karma the Dark World is horror. It taps into themes that are inherently terrifying. The idea of being watched constantly, the loss of free will, the fear that your memories aren't even reliable. These are the kinds of fears that gnaw at you on a deeper level, even if the gameplay itself isn't actively frightening, which we will get onto later. So when we circle back to the question of is Karma the Dark World even a horror game, the story makes a very strong case for yes. The dystopian nightmare it paints is filled with horror-inspired themes. Control, paranoia, the uncanny, it just delivers them in a slower, more cerebral way, rather than through blood, gore or jump scares as you would typically expect from the genre. Now let's talk gameplay, because this is where the question of whether Karma the Dark World is really a horror game comes into sharp focus. Most of what you're doing in the game is walking through environments and solving puzzles, and these puzzles are generally pretty simple. Take the mannequin sequence near the beginning for example. You're surrounded by these unsettling figures, and the game leans on how creepy mannequins are in general, but in practice the puzzle is easy and straightforward. The horror here isn't in failing the puzzle, it's in the way the setting makes you feel whilst you're doing it. The tension comes from anticipation, not from the mechanics. The stamping puzzle works in a very similar way. You're going through this very mundane process of stamping papers, but the game's presentation makes it feel cold and mechanical, almost dehumanizing. Again, the puzzle is not difficult, you are not under any real pressure, the unease is purely thematic. It's trying to make you feel like a cog in a machine, not necessarily scare you with actual gameplay stakes. And there are, of course, the chase sequences, which are clearly intended to be the most intense sections of the game, and honestly, they do a great job of sounding terrifying. The footsteps behind you feel dangerously close, and the sound design convinces you that you are only a second away from being caught. But if you break these sections down mechanically, all you're really doing is running forwards down an extremely linear path. It is very hard to actually fail these sections. Once you realise that, the sequences lose a lot of their punch. They go from being genuinely nerve-wracking to more of a performance, moments that make you feel tense without any real danger behind them. Probably the standout set piece is the so-called boss fight against Mother just over halfway through the game. where you're sneaking around and taking photographs without being caught. It's a really striking moment visually, and it sounds intimidating when you describe it, but again, mechanically it's simple and forgiving. You, again, just walk in a straight line. You look for the splashes on the ground to indicate that Mother is there, and then you take the picture. Unless you completely ignore or misread what the game is asking of you, it is very difficult to fail this section. The tension is all about the presentation, her design, the way she moves, the atmosphere of the room, not in the challenge itself. So what does all of this say about the game's fear factor? For me, it boils down to this. The game is excellent at creating the illusion of fear, but it doesn't follow through with mechanics that reinforce it. The sound design makes you feel chased, but you're never really in danger. The puzzles look disturbing, but they're easy. The environments are oppressive and eerie, but they don't necessarily push back against you. That doesn't mean that the game is ineffective. It does succeed in being creepy and unnerving. The atmosphere does a lot of heavy lifting, and there are definitely moments where you'd feel uncomfortable or on edge. But I wouldn't call it scary. For a game to feel scary, you need a real sense of risk, the possibility of failure hanging over you, and Karma the Dark World just doesn't have that. Every aspect of the gameplay is scripted, controlled, and forgiving, which makes it difficult for the fear to really stick once you've played for a couple hours. In the end, the gameplay feels more like an interactive mood piece than a horror challenge. You're being guided through disturbing spaces, but you're never truly threatened by them, and that's why I'd argue the game falls more into the category of being eerie, unsettling, but not outright horror. Quick disclaimer, if you are enjoying this video or Spooky Season as a whole, then please consider subscribing, as we are trying to get to 2,000 subscribers by the end of the year, and we are cutting it a bit close. Thank you very much. So after breaking down both the story and the gameplay, where do I land on Karma the Dark World? Well, first off, let's talk about what works. Visually, the game is stunning. The environments are moody, they are oppressive, and surreal in a way that's instantly memorable, even when the gameplay itself isn't particularly tense. The look of the world makes you feel uneasy. The lighting, the distorted imagery, the strange character designs, all of this comes together quite nicely. It's the kind of game where you will remember certain images and places more than you'll remember what you actually did in those spaces. The story also deserves praise, even though it's abstract and intentionally fragmented and can be difficult to follow at times. It does make you think. Between the 1984 inspired surveillance themes, the ambiguous memories, and the disturbing presence of Mother, the narrative works as a psychological puzzle. It's less about solving every mystery and more about sitting with the discomfort that is created, and in that sense, the story succeeds in being thought-provoking. Now, in terms of value, there are a couple of things to keep in mind with Karma the Dark World. The game is quite short, about 4 to 6 hours. You could probably do it even faster, and the gameplay itself is incredibly simple. You are mostly walking, observing, and solving simple puzzles. Because of that, I don't think Karma the Dark World is worth a full-price purchase for most people. On sale, though, it becomes a very appealing experience. At the right price point, you are getting a few hours of gorgeous visuals, an abstract but engaging story, and a unique atmosphere that is unlike most other games on the market. Karma the Dark World might not be scary in the traditional sense, and whether you personally label it as horror or not depends on how much weight you give to themes versus mechanics. For me, it's more unnerving and eerie than outright frightening, because everything is so scripted and forgiving. But despite that, I'm glad I played it. It is an experience that is worth checking out if you're curious, and I would recommend it to anyone who enjoys atmospheric, thought-provoking games, especially if you can grab it on a discount. So, to answer the question, is Karma the Dark World a horror game? The answer, annoyingly, is maybe. Is it a scary game? No. But is it worth experiencing for the horror themes? Absolutely. At the right price. Thank you for making it to the end of the video. I hope that you did enjoy it. If you did, then please consider leaving a like, as it really does help, and please comment to let me know that you did like the video, as I always read them. If you want to see more horror themed videos from me, then make sure to subscribe and look at everything else we're doing for the month of October. But for now, that is all from me. Have a nice day, and goodbye.